Something interesting is happening with Claude right now. Over the last couple of weeks, a noticeable number of paying users, especially developers and power users, have been publicly canceling their subscription. The latest trigger is an invisible watermark that Anthropic started embedding in Claude's text outputs worldwide. But this isn't just about one feature, it's the accumulation of restrictions, the perceived quality changes, the policy positions, and the rapid rise of very capable open weight models that cost a fraction of the price. And all of this is unfolding while Anthropic, the company that makes Claude, is preparing what could be one of the largest IPOs in history. And with private valuations already around a $2 trillion level, there's talk of maybe even more. I'm not sure that's there anymore. But today I want to talk through what's actually happening. Separate the signal from the noise and look at how these pressures might affect the company's valuation story. So let's start with the most recent flashpoint. In early 2026, in August actually, Anthropic began applying an invisible statistical watermark to text generated by supported Claude models. Now, this applies globally, not just in Europe, everywhere. The stated reason is compliance with the EU AI Act. Now, we know that Europe really loves to regulate, and they have these transparency requirements. And Anthropic signed the related code to practice, and the rules took effect August 2nd. The watermark works by influencing low-stakes word choices, synonyms, interchangeable terms. It's not really like a watermark. So that detectable pattern appears in the statistical distribution of the text. Anthropic says it does not change the meaning. It doesn't change the quality, the readability of the output. There are no hidden characters. It's just designed to be machine detectable, but invisible to a normal reader. Now, users immediately push back. The concern is practical. If Claude lightly edits or proofreads your own writing or helps you with code, the watermark can still attach. And for people delivering client work, writing documentation, or shipping code, the idea that their output now carries a persistent "this touched Claude" signal is really uncomfortable. So some max tier subscribers, people paying $100 a month or more, publicly announced that they're canceling. Now, Anthropic said it has not seen a material spike in cancellations, but at the same time, open source tools that strip the watermark have already appeared within hours, and they're spreading quickly on GitHub. So developers are treating it like any other technical constraint. Find the pattern and then neutralize it. So the watermark itself may not destroy the product, but it landed on top of existing friction. And that's the combination that's driving this conversation. This is not the first time that users have felt that Claude was being constrained. Earlier in 2026, there were waves of complaints that responses had become shorter and they'd become more cautious or maybe a little less analytically deep, whatever. But Anthropic acknowledged the changes in response style, moving forward toward a more collaborative, iterative behavior while denying that core capabilities had been degraded. I don't know, do we believe them? But the benchmark continued to improve on many measures. Then in June came a more concrete disruption. The US government issued an export control directive that forced Anthropic to disable its most capable models at the time, which was Fable 5 and Mythos 5, for all those users worldwide because restrictions on foreign nationals became a big issue. And so the models were later restored, but with tighter limits, tighter usage caps, visible fallbacks to weaker models on certain categories of requests, particularly around cybersecurity and attempts to extract capabilities for training competing systems. I noticed this when I was using Claude. It started to fall back to Opus 4.8. It started to do some crazy stuff. And then it started to yell at me every once in a while, like, you can't say that, or you can't do this, or that's a little sketchy, or whatever. And I was like, I didn't ask for you to judge what I'm putting out here. And it started to judge, and it was a little judgy, frankly. So there have also been use cases where the system basically silently open routes requests away from the flagship model, like I just mentioned, especially when classifiers flag them as high risk. Now, for many everyday users, you can't see this. It's kind of invisible. But for power users building agents or doing specialized work, it feels like the model you paid for is not the model you're getting. And so adding earlier moves that restricted the use of consumer subscriptions to power third-party agent frameworks, and a pattern starts to emerge. Anthropic is deliberately trading some user freedom and consistency for tighter control over how the most capable versions of Claude can be used. That's pretty scary because from their perspective, this is responsible safety engineering. But from the user's perspective, people like you and me, especially developers who treat the model as a core tool, it looks like a progressive restriction of a product that they're paying premium prices for. And nobody likes to spend money on things and then have it be restricted, right? Anthropic's public posture on regulation and open models has also put it in a somewhat isolated position. When a broad industry letter supporting open weight models circulated, signed by OpenAI, that's ChatGPT, Google, NVIDIA, and many others, Anthropic did not sign. CEO Dario Amodei later clarified that the company does not support banning open weight models as a category, but the company has been vocal about the risks of industrial scale distillation, especially from Chinese labs, and has pushed for stronger controls on advanced chips and mandatory safety testing. Now, if you don't know what distillation is, it's essentially when you use somebody else's model to build your own model. So they're thinking, well, the Chinese are taking our really awesome model and they're distilling it down, and then they're putting out these free or really low-cost open weight or open source models. And Anthropic doesn't like that, but that's the nature of what China's been doing for all kinds of things. And so they're trying to eliminate that. I don't know if I agree that we should be eliminating competition just through regulation. I think it's a bad thing. I don't think it's really us against China anymore. I think it's the whole world needs AI, and whoever can build the best AI is going to win. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's capitalism. That's competition. But critics are reading this as protectionism, a closed model company trying to raise the cost and friction for open alternatives that threaten its pricing power. I don't know. Anthropic frames it as a national security and safety prioritization. Both descriptions contain some truth, but the incentives are real either way. Anthropic has also had public friction with the current U.S. administration. Supply chain risk designations, export actions, and disagreements over military and surveillance use cases. That political exposure is pretty unusual for a company of this size and valuation heading into an IPO window. So there's some risks that are building here with Anthropic's IPO and the valuation. Meanwhile, the competitive landscape has shifted hard. Open weight models from labs such as Moonshot, which makes Kimi K3, Jipu, which makes GLM 5.2 and 5.3, DeepSeek, Minimax, and others are delivering strong coding, agentic, and reasoning performance at a small fraction of Claude's token prices. And many are available for download and self-hosting. And on platforms that measure volume traffic, open models are already getting a big handle on a large share of requests. Now, I run tons of different models, right? I have ChatGPT, and I have Claude, and I have Perplexity, and I have Gemini, and I use my own Hermes agent, which uses all of them. And I can tell you that some of these Chinese models are really good. Now, the risk is we're giving our data to the Chinese, but like, what do they care about my, little business ideas, things like that? Maybe they do, but it's a risk I'm willing to take if I don't have to spend an exorbitant amount of money with Claude or with ChatGPT. I'm willing to use DeepSeek Flash 4, version 4, by the way, for grunt work, for reasoning, actually. It's not bad. And so some of these little guys are uniformly better than the absolute frontier closed model like Anthropic and OpenAI. And on many hard benchmarks, Claude still leads. But for the huge range of real production workloads, especially high volume or cost sensitive one, I'm telling you, the open alternatives are pretty good, and they're good enough. They're controllable. They're dramatically cheaper, which makes a big difference. That changes the economics, and it also changes the risk calculation for any team that does not want to be dependent on a single provider's safety classifiers, their usage policies, or their sudden model availability changes. So this is the deeper pressure on Anthropic's model. The closed, high control, high price approach really does work best when the capability gap is large. But when the gap narrows, and that's what's happening now, the cost gap remains enormous and substitution becomes rational. I mean, if you were running a company, you would probably choose the lesser priced model too, right? Now layer this on top of the IPO because that's important here. Anthropic has filed confidentially for an IPO. Market expectations point toward a listing in the October 2026 timeframe with odds of being public by year end. Private market marks have been in the roughly $1 trillion range, with secondary trading higher at some points. But investors and bankers are underwriting extremely aggressive growth. Projections that put 2028 revenue in the $190 to $200 billion range. Those numbers support conversations about $2 trillion or higher debut valuation. But is that going to happen when the actual valuation does hit? Because aggressive forecasts leave little margin for error. The watermark controversy and the related user friction are currently small in absolute revenue terms. But enterprise and API demand has been the real growth engine. Narrative matters in an IPO roadshow. High-value power users are visible and vocal. Any perception that the product is becoming more restrictive, less consistent, or easier to substitute with cheaper open alternatives can pressure the growth assumptions and the multiples that investors are willing to pay. So if you're one of those investors, you got to watch out for the downside because the bull case really does remain pretty powerful. Anthropic still produces some unbelievable and some capable models that are available. Enterprise demand is real, and safety positioning can be a feature for large regulated customers. The risk case, though, is that the combination of trust, friction, policy isolation, and open weight competition slows the growth trajectory just enough to make the 2028 numbers look optimistic rather than conservative. And in a high multiple story, that difference is expensive. So where does that leave us? Well, Anthropic is not collapsing. Claude is still a top-tier model, but the company is navigating a difficult tension right now. The more it prioritizes control, the more it prioritizes safety classifiers and regulatory compliance, the more it creates friction for the exact users who were its strongest advocates and early revenue drivers. I was one of them. I love Claude. At the same time, open weight models are making the pure proprietary economics harder to defend at the margin. So for the IPO, the question is whether the growth story can absorb these pressures without multiple compression. For builders and users, the practical question is simpler. How much control, consistently, and cost predictability are you willing to trade for absolute peak capability? It's a business decision, but it's also becoming kind of a personal decision. That's the real story underneath the cancellations and the watermark debate. The incentives are clear on all sides. The outcomes will tell us which model of AI development scales. Thanks for watching. If you're building with these systems, I'd be interested to hear how you're thinking about the closed versus open trade-off right now. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet and give me a comment below and we'll have a little discussion. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. See you soon.